Did you like the way when you texted me to say that the jury were still out and we're going to go into how long they were out for? And I sent you back, I covered all bases. I sent you back a thing saying something like, well, she'll either walk or she could get done for murder.
But that's kind of
and
obvious.
It sounded really, but it was actually clever of me because, you know, this is what happens if a jury are out for a long period of time. Your mind starts working, you're waiting for the jury to come back. And I mean, we're only the journalists. Like, can you imagine if you're engaged in the case, if you're family of the victims or if you know the accused and you're kind of going, they're taking this long because they can't agree. They're taking this long because, but they were probably ultimately taking that long because murder is the most serious verdict you can come in with. It's got a mandatory life sentence and most people know that. And this was the murder of two men whose bodies were found, you know, in 2014. So Ruth Lawrence, 46, guilty of the murder of two men. Yeah. She joins a very small amount of women.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an unusual murder. And you know, there hasn't been a whole lot of publicity about a double murder like this. You know, it was kind of seen as a sort of a gangland murder, but not quite. And we kind of know from what, you know, has come out in the trial that while it was technically a gangland murder, it isn't the type of killing you would normally associate with that, in that the two men who died were at very best, you know, very low level involved in criminality. Now, it did come out in court, you know, that Eoin O'Connor, when he's 32 when he died, and his friend Anthony Keegan, 33, they were involved. Eoin was selling drugs to a dealer in Ballyjames and Cavan, and to Neville van de Westhuizen, who was Ruth Lawrence's partner at the time. And so, but from that, there was never a whole lot of publicity and people weren't too well aware of it. And it was an unusual trial as well. I mean, like the jury were out for nearly 14 hours, which if you put in context, say like the Richard Satchwell trial, which was considered long, was 9 hours, 21 minutes. And I know that because I looked it up during the 14 hours I was waiting for the verdict to come back. But there was another, like you did say, she's either going to be done for murder, she's going to walk, but there was another verdict that had been put to the jury that there was, as the judge called it, a fallback one of assisting an offender. So you're wondering then, were they going to find her guilty of Eoin O'Connor's murder and not guilty of Anthony Keegan's, but guilty of assisting an offender? And was it this kind of little bit of complexity that was causing it? But then we heard then that the jury did, when they were given their verdict, or asked then, you know, was it by more than 10? And if so, what was the numbers? And so it was 11-1 murder for Eoin O'Connor and 10-2 in the case of Anthony Keegan. So, I mean, it was majority verdicts in both cases. And you could see the jury came back in very grim-faced. And I was kind of thinking the worst, I suppose, from the family's point of view, I suppose even selfishly from, you know, as a journalist point of view, that there was going to be a complex verdict, or, you know, one of these assisting an offenders are acquitted of all charges on one and not the other. And but it came back as a double. She's a double murderer now.
But like, I mean, we can talk freely about this case because this has been before a jury and it has gone on for a long period of time, and it wasn't presented in the timeline that we're going to talk about it shortly. The pieces of evidence were coming and it was jumping forward and back. So it was difficult enough one to report on the podcast, but nonetheless we persisted. And you eventually got this picture of what had happened, or certainly what the prosecution had at that point alleged had happened, that the jury obviously believed by majority ultimately. But what we couldn't really say with much detail was how bizarre it was that in the dock sat a woman, a 46-year-old blonde, very ordinary looking, attractive woman. And no doubt for the jury to come back, you know, even in the movies, there's usually a man sat there, you know, a mean looking guy with sort of, you know, muscles and tattoos and kind of thing. This is not what a gangland killer looks like.
Well, she did have the tattoos because we know she's a tattoo artist and that's what she worked at.
Many people nowadays.
I'm not sure if the jury could see it, but you could see her. Yeah. She had tattoos visible on her fingers, and there are some photographs on the internet where you can see she shows off more of her tattoos. So she was tattooed, but again, she looked quite, you know, but as far as the jury concerned...
The most important thing I said there was that she was female, really.
I guess she was female. And she sat impassively, impressively impassively, I might say, throughout the trial. She didn't react to anything, and she always looked calm, even this afternoon, you know, as you know, I suppose the kind of the realization that she was going to be now spending a long time in prison. Like, she didn't react. She picked up her tote bag or like kind of a canvas bag and a cushion that she had with her every day, and she went off out through the door with the prison officers, and that was that. There was no sign of any reaction. While she was
how
sitting,
was she dressed kind of every day, and how did she?
She managed her combinations quite well. I actually took notes every day, knowing you were going to ask me this, but
I didn't. I was afraid to when there was a jury there.
Yeah, but I didn't actually compile them all. But today it was a low neck, a kind of mauve jumper with a white polo neck, and she also had variations of that. She had kind of a grey Aran jumper one day, and she
kind of conservative then.
And yeah, very much. It was kind of reflective, I suppose, of her age. Mid-40s at that stage. It wouldn't be unusual. Like, she wasn't dressed extravagantly or underdressed or overdressed. Like, it was pretty.
There wasn't
kind
loads
of smart
pictures
casual
used of her during the course of the trial. There was one in particular where she looked like a businesswoman.
Yeah, that seemed to be kind of kind of a business suit she was wearing, and I think that picture was taken by the Collins agency shortly after she had been arrested at Dublin Airport in 2023, and she'd been brought, I think, was it to Kells or Trim Court? I think that was the initial district court where she was charged. So that was back in 23. So here we are now in November 25.
Has she been in custody since?
She's been in custody since then, and she would have been in custody from October the previous year in
South Africa.
In South Africa, she would have been in since October 2022. Like, she's been in custody, so that was in South Africa, and she wasn't then extradited back until 2023 in May that year. And then she was obviously then she was charged with the murder, but the DPP had been charged that both of them, herself and Van der Westhuizen, were directed they'd be charged with murder back in October 2016. So that's kind of when the extradition and the international arrest warrants and the Interpol red notice would have gone out.
And the fact she ran had to have influenced the jury.
Yeah, and it was
as Pat O'Connell, who was just in before you, our colleague, said, innocent people don't run.
Yeah, and she could have had, there was lots of other reasons why she could have run. I mean, we did hear evidence about, kind of threats to them. They were in fear. But she wasn't called in evidence to give any of this. And there was a little bit came out then as well. There was two pastors who gave evidence for the defence at the end, who had mentioned that she had worked in their charity homes, for a couple of years. But one of them had said that he had been told that she was in fear of her life, and they helped with trafficked women, and that he was kind of basically wasn't allowed to continue down that vein because she would have to be called as a character witness, or not. Sorry, she would then herself have to be called as a witness, so she wasn't. So there was no evidence put to the jury that she was in any way coerced into doing all this. But the way they kind of ran, like literally just days. I mean, they went on the run, they broke into an abandoned house, like literally, 2 days after the two Dublin men went missing, and then they're down in Rosslare Friday morning, desperately trying to scrabble cash together to get a ticket on the ferry, and drove to London and staying in a block of flats with a connection of Van der Westhuizen's. And the Jason Symes and Stacey Symes, his daughter, who were kind of the key state witnesses, they were with them at that time, and they ended up in a homeless shelter for a while in the UK before coming back and giving their statements to the guards.
So that all sounds quite unplanned, really. But
I mean, he was knocking on the door of his father, and his father could only give him 50 quid at one stage. So I mean,
we come back to that. But so, who is Ruth Lawrence, and how did she end up getting found guilty of double murder? Like, where is she from? What's her background?
I have to say, she's going to be sentenced on the 8th of October. So, we'll hear a victim impact statements there. And presumably we may not hear something about her background. I mean, what we do know... Will
it matter in a murder conviction?
No, and sometimes
sometimes
they don't bother. They kind of more or less just say, look, my client is coming.
They'll allow the families of O'Connor and Keegan give their victim impact statements, but is there any point in
Well, there is, in a sense that if somebody expresses their remorse and accepts their guilty verdict and accepts what the jury said, it may help with the parole in 10 or 12 or 15 or 20 years down the road. Whereas if they're constantly and I think it even affects their prison regime until their appeal is over, that they're kind of considered, if they haven't accepted their fate, so to speak, if they haven't affected the verdicts, they're not necessarily, on that pathway to rehabilitation at that stage. So that's always taken into consideration as well in their kind of prison regime.
any idea how Ruth Lawrence, originally from Clontarf, I think, met with the South African national Neville van der Westhuizen, and it's that relationship that becomes, that becomes significant for both of them. It's what draws her basically to the dock and court.
Yeah, well, we don't actually, nothing was said. She's from that neck of the woods, like as in from that neck of the woods being North Dublin, like Clontarf area. And I know from outside of what was said in court that she went to school in the area as well.
Okay.
It was mentioned in court at the time of the killing. She was working, as well as she had been a tattoo artist. At some point, she definitely was one in South Africa, but she was also working in a local hotel as well. And I think Stacey Symes mentioned that she had one or two jobs, that, she seemed to be quite hardworking in that regard. But no, we didn't hear anything. But we did hear about Van der Westhuizen, would have come to Ireland, back as a young fella. And, I think his father and then himself, when he was older, were working in a meat factory in that region. But he seemed
in Dublin.
In County Cavan.
Okay.
But he seemed to have a relationship with this character called Mr. CD that we're not allowed to name, who was referred to in court. Now, the jury heard his real name and the whole lot, but there was a court order made that this person can't be named. So that's still in force. Mm-hmm. And there was kind of a mention that, I think it was one of the O'Connor brothers had mentioned that they had seen this guy before with Mr. CD in North County Dublin, but they knew nothing, in Coolock, but they didn't really know much about him. So presumably he was in and out of that part of Ireland and possibly met Ruth at some point along there. We don't know yet.
We know in 2014 she's living there with him. They're sharing a house. So she's 32. She's 46 now, so 2014 she would have been 32.
Yeah, well, a little bit older, I think, 34, is it? She was born 1979. Her birthday is in December. Yeah, look, it was Patrick's cottage is where they were living, and this is on the shore of Lough Sheelin. It's outside of Ballyjamestuff, and it's literally 100 metres or thereabouts from Inchicup Island, where the bodies of the two men would later be found on the 26th of May in It all
sounds very picturesque.
Well, look, I'm familiar with the lakes of West County Westmeath. This is County Cavan, but it's also partly Westmeath. And yeah, it's great when it's sunny. But when it's raining and windy, it's not much fun.
But it's not like you're not painting a picture of somewhere where there should, I'm not innocent, but you're not, this isn't a hub of, an active social life or anything. And yet these people are living here on the shores of a lake and they're drug dealers.
Yeah, yeah. That just shows you the demands.
They're buying quite a bit of gear.
They seem to be. The Symes talked about getting their 2 ounces, whatever, and they were selling 2 ounces over a period of a week or 2 weeks, which is considered fairly low, but they were getting it from Van der Westhuizen, and he in turn then was being supplied by Eoin O'Connor, and they had been introduced by Mr. CD, and Stacey then would have talked about, when she was making her trips to Dublin, she would pick up things, and she agreed that sometimes that would be drugs to bring back and hand them over to Van der Westhuizen at Patrick's cottage.
And there was guns involved here as well. So Van der Westhuizen was ultimately being described in court as a wholesaler of drugs. He had quite a number of weapons in his possession over the course of the time, or certainly within the house. He was living with Ruth Lawrence. There was somebody above him again, who is only been described as Mr. CD, and who was the go-between between O'Connor, who clearly wasn't.
It was more O'Connor was the go-between. He was introduced as the go-between.
Yeah. So O'Connor was
Mr. CD. So
O'Connor was really a courier. He was collecting the money.
That would probably be a good description. And he was at the very, unfortunately, the lowest level, I suppose, of this organisation that were ultimately in control of these drugs. And he was ultimately at the mercy, I suppose, of being stuck in between that. He was under pressure to collect the money, and he was trying to put pressure on the Symes and Van der Westhuizen to meet him so that he could collect
the money for sort of dramatic
which
purposes.
Is just money he was going to have to pass on.
The story is really that Van der Westhuizen stole the drugs essentially from O'Connor. He was under pressure to go and collect the money. He was going to put a bit of pressure on Symes, but he was really ultimately looking for Van der Westhuizen to pay up. He's so nervous himself going up to the area that he's telling his own family what he's doing and where he's going, and pretty much alerting them should anything happen, this is where I'm going to be. Anthony Keegan is more unfortunate because he seems to just go with them as a bit of a sidekick in the...
Yeah, they were childhood friends.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a joint funeral when they were laid to rest in 2014.
There's this sense of haphazardness about the two of them, you know, in what they're doing, going up, and they're obviously, you know, this is what their world now. They're gone to collect this money. They're aware that there's danger in the ether, but still they go. They have to go.
Yeah, and Eoin O'Connor's partner at the time, like she spoke about, you know, he was reluctant to go. He really didn't want to go. And there was one text found on his phone where Anthony Keegan tells him, "I'm going with you." Like, he was his loyal pal who was going with him. And, you know, it cost him his life. Like, you know.
And the family are very quickly on the scene. You know, the brothers who gave evidence, who drive up looking for them, O'Connor's brothers, you know, they don't know what's happened, but they're really worried that something serious has happened, and still they go to try and find them, and they don't really know what they're going to find or be confronted with. Something chaotic has happened, but I mean, their murders must have been terrifying.
Well, we know from the pathology report that Anthony Keegan was shot at least one bullet in behind the ear and one in the neck. It was kind of surmised that he probably died first, on the basis both of kind of what Ruth and Neville were saying to the Symeses, like kind of the day after this happened, the day after they disappeared, and that Eoin had initially been shot by Ruth, but something had gone wrong. There was a twist, like he kind of moved away. It's possible he was gotten into a headlock. He had the injuries on one side of his face that weren't inflicted, you know, as a result of the bullet, and then he had a bullet to the head as well that killed him, and that was found literally in his skull cavity. So, and he had his initial. They presumed the first wound went through the pelvis area because there was blood staining on the clothes, and that if he was already dead, there wouldn't necessarily have been that kind of blood staining or to that extent. So, in a sense, Mary Cassidy's she did the autopsy, or she did the post-mortem on Eoin O'Connor, and her description of those injuries tied in very much with Stacey Symes and Jason Symes' account of there was a twist and a headlock. And so that kind of, it was one of the circumstantial strands that I suppose would have helped the jury make.
Was a crime scene ever identified? Were they in a car, or were they perhaps in that house where Neville van der Westhuizen was living with Ruth Lawrence?
That was the thing. There was never a crime scene. There was no mention of any weapons being found in the case as well. There were, you know, there was evidence of a cleanup. There was bits of mobile phones found in a you know, there'd been a fire lit outside.
Yeah.
You had Stacey Symes talking about, you know, she was asked to do a cleanup. She smashed cups that were out there because they had a coffee. So that's kind of putting the two Dublin men in the cottage, in Patrick's, or at least outside it. But no, to answer to your question, there was never a murder scene found, and neither was the murder weapons found either. And
Anthony Keegan was shot, the prosecution said, by van der Westhuizen.
Yeah, and then he finished off Eoin O'Connor after Ruth had fired the first shot that went through his abdominal area. It was, I think it was just to one side of the belly button, was the way it was Mary Cassidy described it.
It doesn't give us a detail or give us any indication about who died first.
No, it doesn't, but they're presuming that if Anthony Keegan had kind of gone as, you know, the protector, as in these cases, normally you take out the bodyguard, so to speak, first. And the idea that he was shot from behind suggested that they were unaware of what was about to happen, and that quite more than likely Anthony Keegan would have reacted if Eoin had been shot first
and not died from that shot. There probably would have been a scrambling.
Yeah, and possibly more injuries. But I mean, again, you know, the bodies were in an advanced state of decomposition. It was just over a month later before they were found. And we heard evidence about, you know, how they were left under a tree, and they had planned to move them on again.
They were loaded, obviously, onto these boats that they were looking at borrowing, or there was mention certainly of the boats they were loaded onto a boat. Yeah. Right? And somebody either, you know, had a little outboard engine or rowed across the lake to this island where a piece of undergrowth was found, and both these men were just dumped there, not really buried at all.
Yeah, they were wrapped up in coal sacks and a bit of tarpaulin and in a blue nylon sleeping bag and left there, and there was a few branches left over. But it looks like, more or less from the evidence, it looks like there was a plan to move the bodies, and that they were going to use these concrete blocks that were found there as well. They were going to use these possibly to weigh the bodies down, but in the lake. But they fled in the meantime.
So they left them really to rot on the banks of that island. I mean, the evidence given about how they were found, it was really the stench of the decomposition that alerted them. In the meantime, Van der Westhuizen and Ruth Lawrence and the Stimeses had made this chaotic trip initially to London, and eventually the Stimeses came back, and they kind of pretty much went back with their hands up and went in and told police what had happened, while the other pair had made their way to South Africa to a new adventure.
Yeah, and I mean, they took off. They left the Simons in the lurch. The people whose apartment they were staying in said you have to go, and they basically got someone to pick them up in a car and drop them at a homeless shelter. And they came back to Ireland. They were actually interviewed by Gardaí, I think it was in Kells on the 30th of May. So that was just 4 days after the bodies were discovered. And they gave a number of lengthy interviews throughout June as well. And at some point after that, they would have entered the witness security program. So
while I suppose the two people that would have been a danger to them, being Ruth Lawrence and Van der Westhuizen themselves, were at this point in South Africa, we don't know what, connection or that shadowy Mr. CD would have been of danger to them. But they did seem to, the Simeses seem to have lived a regularly ordinary life despite being on the witness security program. They weren't relocated anywhere in the country, and there was a kind of a watching brief over them.
Yeah, I mean it's a one for one kind of system, and it's, if you don't get to live, I think this was said in court, you don't get to live a 5-star life if you have a 2-star life in Ireland. So you get the equivalent in whatever country you go to.
But funny, while you look for information from the witness security program, it's seen as this very sort of staunch, everyone is treated the same kind of way and no one gets special treatment. And yet that's not normal treatment for somebody on the witness security program to remain within the area they're living in. And presumably they remained within whatever.
No, we don't know. We don't know where the Sims are.
Oh, you don't know where they're living?
No. Like it was mentioned
I thought they were
in the absence
back
of a jury.
In their own, was it not said in court that at some point anyway, between 2014 and when they gave evidence, that they were still in their own area? No? No,
it was mentioned that they weren't in the jurisdiction because there was issues with getting the connection.
Sorry, I misread that.
Because the trial nearly didn't happen. Now we're on to day 3, and Jason Symes, basically it emerged he'd had a serious heart attack.
Right.
And there was evidence heard, in the absence of the jury, about how serious it was. And then there was an application to allow him give evidence by video link, which he did in the end. So the jury wouldn't have known this. They'd been told that there was, a substantial witness had a medical issue, but didn't say what one. Now, it was never clear. Now, they did say in the absence of a jury that they were outside this jurisdiction, but that was never said in front of the jury either.
Right. And that's maybe where my confusion came from, because I thought there was something about help with a motorbike and
he was trying to work again. So I suppose you would have had Patrick Ageby when he was cross-examining Jay Symes. He would have asked him. He was kind of making the point, I suppose he was trying to get the evidence to say, look, as he said in his closing statement, you're getting something out of this.
Yes.
So he was asking, so he agreed, yes, that, his daughter Stacey had her 3rd level education paid for, that, they were basically, the rent was being paid wherever they were. And he volunteered, at one stage they gave me a motorbike, but he said actually in the long run it set him back because he fell off and broke his wrists and elbow.
But the rent was being paid and Stacey Symes' education was paid for. Yeah. In whatever fresh jurisdiction they've been living in since 2014 when they sign up to this program.
Well, again, that was never made clear, but it was a live case since then. So presumably,
what did you feel about
they were
them as witnesses?
They were. Well, I have to say they were difficult to understand, and it wasn't just me. I spoke to colleagues, I spoke to other people who were in the court, and it was hard to understand. The jury did ask for their transcripts, so they would have had a better view of exactly what they said than anyone else. apart from the judge and the legal team who have access to the transcripts as well.
Do you mean it wasn't coherent, their evidence?
No, it was the delivery. And sometimes there was a little bit of confusion, answering the wrong question and then a little bit of confusion and getting that right. I mean, Stacey Symes was probably a lot clearer than her father, Jason, who by his own admission was, was a chronic alcoholic, and he was on, I think he mentioned 32 medications as well. And he was also mentioned that he didn't have his hearing aids at one point. So like he wasn't a straightforward witness. They had to speak kind of slowly and carefully, and he was going off on tangents a couple of times. So you're kind of you were a little bit concerned, like if you were the prosecution, that he wasn't making it easy for the jury. But both of them did. Like the key for them was to talk about this Wednesday evening. So the two Dublin men went missing on 22nd of April 2014, and then on that was a Tuesday, and then on the Wednesday, they called out to their house in Patrick's and found this kind of manic situation, this tense situation going on. There was a Latvian man, Vitaitas Bitaras, who was there, and they thought he was helping. As far as they were concerned, he was helping them do a cleanup, and he was holding a machete, shouting and roaring. There was a lot of drugs seemed to have been taken, and at the moment they walked in, Jason Symes' phone was ringing, and his son Sean was on it, and he was saying, "Look, there's these Dublin men up here, and they're angry, and they're looking for you, and they're looking for Van der Westhuizen," and he was in a panic. And then the guards rang shortly afterwards. They rang Jay Symes saying, "What's going on? Like there's two Dublin lads are missing. You have to come in and talk to us." So there was this huge amount of pressure going on, and Jason Symes was talking about, like, they were trying to feed him drugs, I think he mentioned benzodiazepine or whatever, benzos, and there were yellow tablets, he says, that'll, stop the shaking and focus your mind. And he was talking about when they were driving, I think the next day, they went to Cavan Garda station, and he said they were telling them what to say. And then he went to Navan with Van der Westhuizen. They both went to talk to Gardaí on the following day, and he was saying that they were shoveling cocaine up my nose. So you're getting this sense of real chaos, kind of like on the brink of madness, really going on, like this whole attempt to kind of cover up. And that was something that Michael Higgins talked about. Like, it wasn't a well-planned murder. They weren't well-planned murders. I mean, for instance, Anthony Keegan wasn't meant to get killed at all, but he came along and they killed him anyway, which is callous and, heartbreaking, for the family involved. But at the same time,
hid the bodies, but not to the plan.
But even so, then on the other side of it, there were other elements that were highly calculated. There was going to get, pairs of mobile phones. You only make calls on one and you receive on the other. And they turned off their own mobile phones when they were, say, for instance, going to the burglary. And then again, after they met the Dublin men on the 22nd, their phones go dead. So they were, the prosecution, making the argument, so these quiet moments come at the time when some serious criminality is happening, or some key moments. And they all tied in with the kind of the version of events that Jason and Stacey Symes gave, and they were always together, which was kind of pointed out by Patrick Ageby as possibly being, suspicious, maybe, that they both seem to kind of align with their version of events. But Stacey's explanation it wasn't a direct explanation, but he wasn't driving and she had the Micra, which an uncle of hers had bought, so she could get up and down to Dublin and go to college.
It's not exactly a Ferrari, is it?
No, I didn't get the reg. I didn't get the year of it, but there was none of this was high end. It wasn't high echelon criminal gangs.
Was there a sense or a feeling that they might have been playing down their own role in drug dealing?
Well, I mean, Ageby kind of, he gave kind of a cracker of a line, I suppose, to the jury in his summing up speech. Like he said, they've played the system, they've downplayed what they're doing, and then played the system by getting into the witness program. And he told the jury, and they're trying to play you as well. So he was kind of going for the maximum, as you do as a defense lawyer. He went for the maximum, saying, look, can you give these people credibility? And that was the decision they had to make. And he very much did his best to show all the inconsistencies that were there, of which there were many. But at the same time, Michael Higgins was able to point out where there was a lot of things kind of coincided, and they had to decide, was this just a coincidence? And there were red flags from the other side, and there's coincidence on their side.
Maybe it would have been an idea for Ageby to have pointed out to the jury that, because of the Irish system, that the witnesses that enter the state witness protection program don't actually have to give up all their sins the way they do in other countries, because in Italy, and actually I think pretty much most places in the world where this system works, you have to give full statements about all your involvement in any crime, or else it's deal off and you're cast adrift, having sort of been identified as somebody who'd been, playing with getting onto the system. Whereas in Ireland, as Jonathan Dowdall clearly showed as well, you don't have to admit to any role in crime, and you don't have to tell the truth about your own criminal activity to still be a witness and to still give evidence.
Yeah.
So maybe he missed a trick there, Gageby. Because I don't know whether the general public know that.
Well, he did his best, and there was some legal argument as well about the warning that the judge should give in regard to the witness security program, or I suppose commonly known as the witness protection program, and they were citing a lot of legal cases, which. I thought it was something I might get prepared for this, knowing that you were going to bring this up, but I didn't. It's homework I didn't get done. But there is a number of legal precedents in the warning that a jury should get, and there has been quite a lot of argument over this over the years. And I think, in fairness to Patrick Gageby, he may not have been allowed to go down that road.
Okay. Anyway, in the meantime. So 2014, this happens. So we have Lawrence and van der Westhuizen in South Africa. We don't really know what they're doing over there until in February of 2017. Van der Westhuizen is involved in the murder of a teenager in Durban, and it's very frightening. Another really sort of vicious attack.
Yeah, and we did hear some of this in the during the trial. I think it was I can't remember the witness now. Brought up, it was one of the Garda witnesses, and he was asked about the circumstances.
Yeah, he gives a bit of a
and he's doing 15 years, but like the court reports are out there and they're available on the internet. And so he was one of four men that were in a tattoo parlor in Durban, and a couple of teenagers came in, and they took advantage. There was a phone that was lying somewhere for charging, and they took it, did a runner. The four men went after them, basically beat up the kids, locked them up in a room. There was evidence that one of them was hung upside down, and Vesta Hazen was one of these guys then that beat this kid hanging upside down, and they also gave them some kind of a poison. And one of these kids died, or one of these teenagers died. Another one we know suffered kind of permanent damage as a result of that, and he's serving 15 years for that. So he was there's actually separate extradition proceedings, so they're kind of in abeyance, but it's expected that the verdict of the jury this week will actually give that a bit of another push in South Africa. That this isn't kind of a shot in the dark. He may or may not get convicted. So it is possible that they might accede to him being extradited from prison to come back here. Now, it depends, of course, on the likes of the dead teenager's family. They might say, we're not going to let him go and have a nice cushy time in a soft Irish prison.
Yes. Because
we know that the prisons in South Africa aren't great, because Ruth van der Westhuizen, when she was arrested, she was willing to pay her flight home straight away. She didn't want to spend as long as she did in prison. Like, I think she was nearly 8 months in prison. Like, she was arrested in October 2022, and it was the following May before she was brought back to Dublin.
What was happening? Because the DPP directs the couple be charged with murder in 2016, on the 13th of October, actually 2016. He is arrested and charged in relation to this murder in 2017. In 2019, she has her passport renewed while working in South Africa, and she's working at this point with the Christian Revival Church. Now, we'll probably hear a bit more about this.
She was with them from 2016. Right. So it looks like, and one of the pastors had said that he was told by a third party that Ruth was in fear of her life, and so something they could do, and she came to work for the CRC, the Christian Revival Church. So she was likely she had already finished with van der Westhuizen at that stage, but she was still in South Africa. And then up until 2019, she was between Bloemfontein and Durban, she was working with the CRC. But when she was arrested in 2022, and we know this from some court reports at the time, she was in a place called Pellissier in Bloemfontein, and she was actually living in a nice, neat little bungalow at that stage, and she was working as a tattoo artist. So, and she offered an early, I think she was in court the next day, and said that I'll buy my ticket and be ready to go home. So she never resisted the extradition.
She was a long time free, considering that it was 2016 when the the direction those arrest warrants were issued? Like, who was dragging their feet there? Was
Well, don't forget, this is all going through, I suppose, at a time when you have international lockdown going on. And it did actually just jam up and gum up sort of processes all over the world. So I don't know if that was part of it. But they would have issued, I think, the arrest warrants from Ireland in 2016. And they did have information that they had gone to South Africa. They got their flight, I think, through Istanbul, and from there to South Africa to Johannesburg. So they would have been aware. Now, when I suppose an Interpol, the red notice would have gone out, I don't know. It hasn't necessarily been mentioned. But it took until, I think it was until, basically there would have been, when was it? It was after 22. She got her passport renewed then.
That renewed in 2019, yeah?
Yeah, and then there would have been, I think it was in 2022. That she was arrested. So it was like, and then it took a while for that to be produced, like, I think because it would have been done in Pretoria, that's where the extradition court is. And then Neville separately was brought to court in November. And so he had a completely separate hearing. There were two separate tracks that they're on. And in terms of like, they're just talking, like they mentioned in court as well, that he can get parole in 2027. There's no guarantee he'll get it. And otherwise then he'd be serving his time until 2030. But I think, 2035. But I think the investigators in Ireland are pretty confident that they're going to get him back and that they will make it stick as well.
In 27. So what about Ruth Lawrence? Was she any family there? Was there anyone there?
I believe there were some members of family there. There was 2 or 3 people there. I mean, they never gave evidence. They were never identified. So I don't know is the honest answer.
She certainly wasn't making eye contact.
No, there was some people that I think they did kind of speak to her on one occasion after the jury had risen. And one of them certainly looked like her. But I can't really say for definite, like, it was family or not.
And what about the O'Connor and Keegan families? They had been there early in the
I mean, there was 2 full benches in Court 9 that were, reserved for the members of the family, and they were full every day. And, at max you get 8 on each, so there was at least 16, and I think there was a few more, standing elsewhere and taking up other seats in the court as well. I suppose they were competing with some of the court watchers as well as the media. On some of the days, there would have been 7 or 8 of us, and other times it was just be myself or Alison O'Riordan from IINA, the Irish International News Agency, who cover all the murder trials. But I suppose that was like when some of the technical stuff was going on. I mean, we had 3 days of this really drudge of going through the phone records. And there was these very helpful color-coded maps being shown to the jury, which we didn't have, which is, it makes it much clearer for the jury. So, while we're kind of sitting in the body of the court, just behind the lawyers, we're kind of thinking, God, that's going to be kind of tough to take in. But at the same time, they have the booklets of photographs. They can see the scene. They can see the remains of the fire. Then we didn't see any of that. We didn't see any of the kind of the timeline of the phones traveling back and forth between North Dublin, North Inner City, and through Ballyjames stuff. And when a particular burner phone went online, and the significance of that, and what phones were near it at the same time. So all of this was kind of backing up the story that the Symes, the version of events, which was the prosecution's version of events, that this all started with a plot to rob drugs from Eoin O'Connor. And then he was basically lured all the way up to Ballyjames stuff, supposedly to collect money, and instead was murdered. So
Ruth Lawrence is used to prison. She's been in the Doka Centre, presumably, in Mountjoy for some time. What happens to her in prison? What happens to somebody who gets convicted of murder?
Well, it'll change in a sense that if you're on remand, it's you're not getting into any long-term programs or anything like that. Again, there'll be kind of an evaluation of if there's any threat to her from other prisoners, which would be very unusual in fairness in the female prison, but it may be there. In which case, I mean, where I think the women who, for whatever reason, need to be in isolation are usually held in Limerick, so it's possible she could go to Limerick. But we don't know that yet. I mean, she's going to stay where she is, presumably until the 8th of December, which is when her sentence hearing.
Does she get put on this watch thing, they talk about, because she's been found guilty of murder? Is it? I
think that's standard practice for all newly convicted prisoners, that that they be under observation, but that's standard. It doesn't matter who you are. Like, I mean, if you're, whatever level, like, when somebody come in, if they think they're at a point where they're possibly emotional or might take their own life, they're going to be watched. So I mean that's a standard.
It's a huge thing for people, no matter what. I mean, she has obviously was ready to hand herself up when she did, but she sat through that court case. She has pleaded not guilty. She has clearly been hopeful that she's going to get off. Certainly the more serious of the charges, as anybody would be. And yet this is the worst case scenario for her. Life changes completely, even though she goes back to the same place. She's been held to the same enough regime, but life changes completely in that she's to get her head around. Pretty much been in jail until she's going to be in her coming up to 70.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the average life sentence now. I mean, people used to give out, that, you could apply for parole after 7 years, but I mean, not that anyone got it. And it was years ago, I think, when we were kind of, 20 whatever years ago in the Sunday world, lifers were doing maybe 12. And now it's continually rising. I think it's close to 22 now. But the system has changed. The parole board has changed. So a lot of what it will be taken into account is your contrition and not apologising. But she has yet to do that. So we don't know what she's going to do. That
and also the fact that she's murdered 2 men.
Yeah, and I mean, and did their best to cover it up and flee from the consequences. And, we didn't hear her side of the story. So, I mean, the only story out there is what the prosecution put out there. And that was that, she liked playing around with guns, she liked drugs, and she liked Van de Westhuizen, who is also a killer, and she's now a convicted killer as well.
She made some very bad decisions in her life, and really they came home to roost for her today. Well, Eamon Dillon, thanks a million. I'm sure we're going to come back to her as more information and a kind of a clearer picture of her life and how she got involved in all this emerges. So thanks a million.
Always a pleasure, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.